They called me the help at my brother-in-law's wedding, so I asked for the microphone for 1 minute. She stood still for a second, just one, but in that second, 5 years of swallowing it all down passed through her mind like a hot wind you can't step out of the way of. The hall was packed, the lights flickered softly against the white walls, the champagne was overflowing, and someone had just said, out loud, in front of everyone, that she was the help. Didn't hint at it, didn't whisper it. She said it. In so many words, with a smile at the corner of her mouth. And Lauren, who had spent the whole day doing her hair, picking out that rust-colored dress she'd saved for a special occasion, who had arrived early to help with the arrangements because she was family. Lauren stood there, holding a tray of welcome drinks she'd grabbed from the table because her hands needed something to do. That's when the bride turned her face the other way. And her brother-in-law, the groom, the brother of the man she'd been married to for 6 years, didn't say a word. Lauren took a deep breath, set down the tray, and went to ask for the microphone. But before she got there, before you understand what happened in that hall, you need to understand who Lauren was. Because this was not a woman who asked for a microphone for just anything. She grew up in a small town in the Ozarks where everyone knew everyone, and life had a rhythm that Chicago never quite understood. The daughter of a public school teacher and a carpenter who made custom furniture in the backyard, she learned early on that the good things in life came slowly and with effort. She studied business administration in nearby Naperville, paying her own way with a scholarship and whatever side gigs she could pick up along the way. When she graduated, the whole family went to the ceremony. Her mother cried from start to finish. It was on a business trip, already 28, that she met David. He had an easy smile and a way of giving her attention that she wasn't used to. They dated for 2 years and got married in a simple ceremony at a farmhouse borrowed from a friend. There was nothing luxurious about it, but there was plenty that was real. The problem started when she was introduced to David's family. Mrs. Eleanor received Lauren at a Sunday lunch with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had a way of looking at Lauren, a quick evaluation from top to bottom, discreet, almost imperceptible, that Lauren felt on her skin from the very first day, as if she were a piece of clothing that didn't match the room. Her father-in-law, Mr. Arthur, was a man of few words, always seated at the head of the table with the air of someone who didn't want to be bothered. But at least he wasn't rude. He left Lauren alone. That was already something. Her brother-in-law, Brandon, was 26 when Lauren joined the family. Handsome, with that carefully cultivated stubble, always in dress clothes that looked freshly pressed. He smiled at her at family events, made comments about her job in a tone that never made clear whether it was a compliment or not. He had a way of speaking that left everything hanging in the air. David saw what his wife was feeling and said she was overreacting. That his mother was like that with everyone. That Brandon meant no harm. And Lauren, because she loved her husband, and because she had learned in childhood that complaining without a visible reason was making a fuss over nothing, kept it inside. But things kept piling up. At Mrs. Eleanor's 58th birthday, Lauren arrived with a cake she had made herself, a recipe from her mother, decorated with chocolate fudge truffle flowers. Her mother-in-law looked at the cake, then at Lauren, and said it looked nice in a way that sounded exactly like the opposite. Then she picked up the bakery cake her sister had ordered and put it in the center of the table. The following New Year's, Lauren tried to join a conversation about the family's plans to renovate the country cottage. She had project management experience, had a head for numbers, and could help. Mrs. Eleanor interrupted with a smile and said that was a family matter. Lauren had been married to David for 3 years by then. There was the Christmas when Mrs. Eleanor gave out gifts to everyone, and Lauren's was a little box of drugstore soaps with the price tag still stuck on. She opened it, thanked her, and went to the bathroom to hide the look on her face. But what stuck with her most was the feeling that, in that family, she would always be a bit of an outsider, as if there were an invisible membrane separating those on the inside from those on the outside, and she never, no matter how hard she tried, could cross it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and, especially, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us since we're just starting out. Now, continuing, And then Brandon announced his engagement to Courtney. Lauren met Courtney at a family gathering at a Michelin star restaurant where no one asked whether everyone could afford it. Courtney had salon straight hair, a smile that was almost always about herself, and a way of telling stories in which she was always the most interesting center. She was the daughter of a family that had had money for generations, the kind of money that doesn't need to be mentioned because it's in everything, in the purse, in the shoes, in the way the person takes their time sitting down because they know the table will wait. Courtney's mother, Margaret, came to the second gathering. A 63-year-old woman, short platinum hair, pearl earrings that certainly weren't imitation, a careful smile that revealed exactly how much she was evaluating each person at the table. Margaret was the kind of woman who made elegance her armor, polite enough to never be directly rude, sharp enough that you felt the cut. She greeted Lauren with a light handshake, almost no pressure, and asked where she worked in a tone that suggested the answer wasn't going to impress her anyway. Lauren replied that she was a manager at a company in the region, handling the financial side and projects. Margaret listened, smiled, and turned to talk to Mrs. Eleanor about the wedding menu. In the following months, as the wedding planning meetings multiplied, Lauren began to notice something. She was never included in the conversations about decisions. She was called to help, sure. To get vendor quotes, to call the caterer, to print guest lists. But in the meetings where things were decided, she would show up and disappear without anyone asking for her opinion. She brought it up with David one night. He said she was being sensitive. That word, sensitive, as if noticing how you're being treated were a weakness. Lauren stayed quiet. What David didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that there was a much bigger story running underneath all of that, a story Lauren had been carrying for 2 years, and that she had promised to keep because she thought it was the right thing to do. 2 years earlier, Brandon had shown up at their front door on a Wednesday afternoon. David was traveling for work. Brandon was pale, with the sunken eyes of someone who hadn't slept in days. He sat down in the kitchen and told her that the project he was working on, a business of his own that he had poured years of savings into, was sinking. Debts to suppliers, broken contracts, a partner who had disappeared with part of the money. He was desperate. Lauren listened to everything. Then she spent the next 3 days helping. She analyzed the numbers, found management errors that could still be corrected, contacted suppliers, renegotiated deadlines, drafted documents. She didn't sleep properly for a week. She used contacts she had cultivated over years of serious work to open doors for Brandon. She managed to reach an agreement with one of the main creditors that cut the debt in half. Brandon got out of that situation with the business still breathing. He never talked about it with anyone in the family, not even David. He thanked Lauren in a 2-minute chatwave voice note and disappeared back into his life. Lauren didn't tell anyone either, because she thought that was family business, that it didn't need applause, that it was just the right thing to do. She just wanted to be accepted. But the things you keep inside don't disappear. They just wait. Look, I had to stop here for a second before continuing, because this part got to me in a way. When you do the right thing for someone and you don't even get the bare minimum back, that hurts differently. On the day of the wedding, Lauren woke up with a mix of feelings in her chest. She wanted to be happy for the occasion. She wanted everything to go well. She put on the dress, the terracotta, one she had bought 3 months earlier, and that fit her exactly right. Her dark hair loose down her back, a subtle lipstick that was just enough. She looked beautiful. She knew she looked beautiful. And still, when she looked in the mirror, she felt that same old thing as always. The fear of showing up and still being invisible. David looked at her from the bedroom door and said she looked gorgeous, and smiled the way she loved in him. Lauren breathed. Maybe today would be different. The venue was at a club in a neighboring town, a space with large windows and lights that twinkled like stars on the pale walls. The tables had white flowers, the kind of arrangement that costs more than it looks, and there was something in the air that mixed expensive perfume with pre-wedding tension. Lauren arrived early, as agreed. She had a list of final loose ends that someone had sent her the day before asking her to check. She checked everything. She confirmed the vendors, sorted out an issue with the photographer who had shown up an hour late and was missing one of his cameras. She handled it. She called, negotiated, fixed it. No one was told about the problem or the solution. The guests started arriving. Margaret showed up in navy blue, long earrings, carrying herself like someone who arrived to be admired. She greeted Lauren with that same light handshake as always and asked her to check whether the table reserved for the bride's family had the right number of chairs. Lauren went to check, not because she was staff, because she still thought that being part of a family meant helping. The ceremony was beautiful. Brandon got emotional when Courtney walked in. Mrs. Eleanor cried discreetly, which was a feat because Lauren had never seen her mother-in-law show emotion. Mr. Arthur stayed very quiet beside her, but he ran his hand over his wife's arm once, and that said more than anything. At dinner, Lauren sat at the family table. She was pouring herself some soda when a cousin of Courtney's, around 30-something, asked her to grab more ice from the cart that was right there beside them. Lauren looked at her. The woman looked back, a little confused as to why she was standing there. And that's when Margaret, from the other end of the table, said with that calculated smile, "She's not the staff, sweetheart. She's Brandon's sister-in-law." A pause. The wife of the brother. And as if she wanted to drive the point home with absolute clarity, she added, "Although I understand the confusion, she spent the whole day helping out like she was part of the catering after all." Someone laughed quietly. Lauren didn't see who. She looked at David. He was holding his glass, his eyes on his plate. She looked at Brandon. The groom was talking to someone next to him and didn't react. He didn't turn. He didn't say anything. Mrs. Eleanor, that 65-year-old woman who had spent years making Lauren feel like an outsider, looked at her daughter-in-law. And in that look there was something Lauren had never seen before. There was discomfort. There was, perhaps, shame. But Mrs. Eleanor didn't say a word. Lauren stood there, frozen, holding the cup. The tray of little glasses was right there beside her because she had grabbed it from the table before sitting down, trying to make it easier for everyone to reach. She wasn't from the catering company. She was just helping. And they had turned that into a joke. 5 years of bottled-up things surfaced all at once. She set her glass down on the table with a care that cost more than any scream. She looked at the man working the microphone, moving through the hall for toasts and announcements. She walked up to him, asked for the microphone for a minute. Just one. The man hesitated, looked at someone. Lauren put her hand on the microphone with such a firm calm that he handed it over. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now continuing. The hall went quiet. Not all at once, but it gradually did. Conversations died one by one as people realized there was a woman standing in the middle of the room with a microphone and an expression that wasn't the face of an ordinary toast. Brandon looked at her for the first time that night. Courtney turned her head, eyes wide. Margaret sat very still in her chair. David set down his glass, and Lauren, with her dark hair falling loose over her shoulders, her solid-colored dress, eyes that didn't waver, said, "Good evening, everyone. I know this wasn't on the event's agenda, I just need a minute." She didn't shout, she didn't cry, her voice didn't tremble. That was what scared people the most. Earlier today, someone made a remark about me here. Said I looked like one of the catering staff, and I understand it was said as a joke. A pause. It wasn't funny to me. But that's fine. I've learned that some people can only put others down when the other person is doing more than they are. Margaret's mouth fell open slightly. "I'm not with the catering company. I'm Lauren, married to David for 6 years, the groom's brother." She looked at Brandon. "And in the past few years, I've helped this family in ways most people here don't know about." Brandon stood frozen. 2 years ago, Brandon's business was going under. Heavy debt, a partner who vanished, suppliers at the door. He came to me. I spent a week without sleeping properly, analyzing, negotiating, putting my name and 15 years of professional contacts on the line to open doors for him. She spoke slowly, without rushing. "I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want the credit. I just wanted him to be okay." Silence. The business was saved. Brandon managed to get back on his feet, to grow, to become the successful man who brought this wonderful bride to the altar today. A calculated pause. "I'm happy about that. Truly." Mrs. Eleanor's eyes were glistening, not from joy, But I'm not going to pretend I'm invisible anymore just to please anyone. I came here as family. I worked here as family. And I'll leave as family, whether you like it or not." She looked at Margaret, who didn't look away. In that gaze was a measuring that lasted a second and needed no words. "I wish Brandon and Courtney a beautiful and honest life. It's what every family deserves," and she handed the microphone back. "I know what you're thinking, and I've thought about it too. Did she do the right thing saying all that there? Sometimes I wonder if there wasn't another way. But then I remember the look on her face and I understand. What happened next was the kind of thing that hangs in the air for a while before it starts to fall." David stood up, walked over to his wife, took her hand with a firmness Lauren didn't know he had. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, and that meant more than any speech. Brandon sat there for about 30 seconds that felt like an hour. Courtney whispered something in his ear. He nodded, stood up, and walked over to Lauren. There was no way to know what he was going to say. The whole room was watching. Brandon stopped in front of his sister-in-law. On his face was an expression she couldn't name. Shame, maybe. Or that harder thing, recognizing you were wrong without having a good excuse for the mistake. "She's telling the truth," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Everything she said." Margaret got up from her chair and went to get a glass of water at the other end of the hall. It was Mrs. Eleanor who did the most unexpected thing of the night. Lauren's mother-in-law, that 65-year-old woman who had spent years treating her daughter-in-law with that careful distance, slowly rose from her chair with the dignity of someone who had spent her whole life controlling her own reactions, and walked over to Lauren. She stood in front of her, the two sides looking at each other. "I was wrong about you," Mrs. Eleanor said, softly, but in the silence of the hall, soft echoes. "I made you feel like an outsider because I was afraid you were bigger than us. And you were." Lauren hadn't expected that. No one had. Mrs. Eleanor wasn't a woman who apologized, not because she was mean, but because she had grown up in a family where admitting a mistake was weakness, and she had carried that for decades without realizing what she was doing to the people around her. Lauren kept looking at that woman. She saw in her a person tired of being tough, someone who had reached her 65 years and was realizing, maybe too late, the cost of all of it. She didn't say everything was fine, because it wasn't, not completely, and lying wouldn't help either of them, but she took her mother-in-law's hand, once, carefully, and that was enough for that moment. The night went on. The music came back, slowly, the smell of reheated dinner in the air, someone asking the kids to come back to the tables, a voice on the microphone asking the couple to step onto the dance floor. Life went on the way it goes after a small earthquake, with people rearranging things and pretending the ground is steady while they still feel the echo of the shake. Lauren and David left early, not out of hurt, because they had said everything they needed to say, and staying would just be taking up space. In the car, on the road leading home, the dark asphalt and the streetlights passing slowly, David held the steering wheel and stayed quiet for a long while. Lauren looked out the window. "Why did you never tell me about Brandon?" he asked. She thought before answering. "Because I didn't want you to think I did it to get something out of it." He stayed quiet a little longer. "I should have defended you more," he said. "Back then. The times my mother, the times I saw and pretended I didn't." "Yes," she replied, simply, without punishment, but without lies. "I know." And they stayed like that, in silence, for half the drive. It wasn't a heavy silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people have a lot to work through, but know they have time, and that it's worth trying. In the weeks that followed, things changed slowly, the way true things change. Not with one conversation that fixes everything at once, but with small adjustments, with different choices, with doors being reopened one at a time. Brandon went to Lauren and David's house one afternoon, without warning. He brought a bottle of wine he didn't need to bring. He sat in their kitchen, at that same table where 2 years ago he had arrived desperate, and this time he talked. For real. about how he knew he had taken what she gave and disappeared, about how it was easier to distance himself than to face how much she had done for him, about how he saw what the family did to her and stayed quiet because it was more comfortable. Lauren heard everything. She didn't interrupt. In the end, she said only one thing. "Brandon, I don't need you owing me anything. I just need you to treat me like real family." He nodded, and this time it seemed like he was understanding what that word truly meant. With Mrs. Eleanor, it was slower, harder. There was no formula. They were women from different generations, shaped by different things, with wounds that didn't have the same shape. But there was something new between them after that night, an honesty that didn't exist before. One Sunday, weeks later, Lauren and David went to dinner at his parents' house. Mr. Arthur made barbecue. Mrs. Eleanor prepared the salad Lauren liked, the one with artichoke hearts that she had made only once before and never again. She didn't make a fuss about it. She just put it on the table. Lauren looked at that bowl and said nothing, but she stored it away. Margaret never apologized. Lauren didn't expect her to. Some people wear their armor so tightly that taking it off would mean undoing themselves. Lauren learned not to ask back what some people simply don't have to give. What she took from that marriage wasn't a victory to be celebrated loudly. It was clarity. The clarity that she no longer needed to pretend to be smaller, just to fit into spaces where they didn't want her to grow. That the family she had built with David was real and worth defending. That sometimes asking for a microphone for 1 minute is the most honest gesture a person can make. Weeks later, on a bright, sunny afternoon, Lauren called her mother. She told her everything. Her mother was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line, and then said, "You know, I always knew you'd be able to stand up for yourself. I was just waiting for you to know it too." Lauren smiled. She looked out the living room window at the yard where David was pruning some plants, clumsy in his own way, and she felt that the ground was solid beneath her. End of story. Sometimes we carry weight for years, thinking it's the only way to belong somewhere. Lauren's story reminded me that truly belonging isn't about bowing your head. It's about showing up whole and letting others decide if they can receive you that way. If you made it this far, thank you so much for the real company. Tell us in the comments what you thought, where you're watching from, and if you've ever been through something similar. We'd love to read it. Leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories like this one.